and welcome to the 2020 Glunz Tasting Hall presentation being hosted by Keenan Winery in Spring Mountain District in Napa Valley. Today we have Michael Keenan joining us today, and we're going to go ahead and get started by taking a short tour with Google Earth and make a little presentation. Hopefully everybody notices and recognizes that view of our beautiful planet. And we're going to go ahead and get started right here where we are in Chicago, Illinois. A nice view here on the second day of fall. We've got the city of Chicago beautifully set there. And then we are today going to be staying domestic and heading to the West Coast, heading out to California. And within California, you've got a nice little view of the Napa Valley here. Moving in a little further at a kind of a cool little view of the Spring Mountain District. And you can kind of see how that elevates just north and west of St. Helena and straight up into the mountainside there. And then we're going to sneak right into Keenan Winery. What a view. What an amazing spot. And with that, welcome everyone and welcome Michael Keenan. How are you, sir?
I'm dizzy.
It's the fastest trip from Chicago. Riley, who's actually landing here, taking the reverse flight, wishes it was that quick.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We were flying to Oregon the other day, and the winemaker that we were talking to, the winery owner, is like, God, if only we could actually do that in real life. That'd be a shock for sure.
But now we don't have to travel. We have this wonderful technology. We can be together in the same room while being all in our own rooms.
Absolutely. And here I am in my office, and it looks like I'm on your porch grilling some ribeyes.
I know. You look closer to the winery than I do.
I'm not going to hold that against you, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, it is great to have you, and thank you for taking time out during harvest and your crazy schedule and having you in here. And I've got Matt coming in as well, who will be here as also. Let's see here. So we have a very fun day planned of tasting some really good wines. But before we go into that, Michael, if I could harass you to tell us a little bit about the winery, where it came from and what's going on.
Well, as you can see from the map, and if you could, Joe, could you put the picture back that we were looking at earlier of the property itself so we can see the whole layout?
That one?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this was a piece of property my father found in 1974. So we're talking 46 years ago. And I think the thing of note about 1974 is that Spring Mountain didn't exist as an AVA. There were no AVAs at all. And this part of Napa County was just known as the hinterlands. But Dad's instincts told him to go up an elevation. And that's where he thought the really profound, long-lived, potentially first growth quality Bordeaux-style wines would be made. And that the valley, which at the time, all that was happening in Napa was really Oakville and Rutherford. He thought the soils there were too rich, the wines were too plush and too rich to be really considered as great as they could be. So he was drawn to the mountains, looked at both the west side where we are and the east side, chose the west side for two reasons. He thought the primarily eastern exposure was better than the western exposure of Howell Mountain. And then the second tiebreaker was water, which we have in great abundance, which is just fantastic. So we've been there farming, started planting in 1975. We've had a chance through choice and also by disease to replant every acre of the 50 acres we have under vine at least once over that time period. So we've really gotten to know our property. So we really are the poster child for the multi-generational family-owned estate winery, which is really becoming a rare bird in today's Napa. I mean, just last week, we heard that Burgess sold, and they sold to a winery that was the Heights winery that was sold the year before. And it just, each year, a few more of the old guard get swallowed up and go by the wayside, which we'll see if it's good or bad. I'm not going to make any judgments about it, but it's just a change. I think there is efficacy to our model. We care about our land. We want it to be flourishing into perpetuity. So we take care of it in a way that will provide that. I'm really proud now that my son, who's turning 31 on Friday.
Oh, dear Lord, 31?
I know, it's kind of shocking to think
that makes me feel old.
Well, believe me, it makes me feel even older, which I think I am.
I'm not going to argue with that, Michael.
No, you can't argue with data. But he's really into it. And it's interesting. I think we've done a lot of great things over the last 22 years that I've been running the winery. But it's really great to have the youthful perspective and the irritation of new ideas to sort of jog the habits. So one thing that's new this year is we're getting our first harvest off our Mourvedre block that we planted 3 years ago, which was my son's idea, to also plant Menthea. And then I wanted to plant a little Petit Verdot as an experiment to see how that blends with our estate Cabernet. So this year we got a crop off the Mourvedre and we made rosé from it. So that's going to be probably,
nice.
Probably going to be a one, and talk about a great year to pick to make rosé. Because of possible smoke taint. So we've got the rosé in the cellar. It's clocking it, I think, at 10.3% alcohol by volume, which is we've never made a wine like that before. We picked it at 17.5 bricks. It was pretty funny.
Oh wow! Why?
Because it's rosé.
That low bricks.
Want to be bright and lively. It is.
Wow! All right.
We're actually going to barrel age it in mostly neutral wood for about 6 months. So
okay.
We did one of the barrels through malolactic, so we're really kind of trying a bunch of different stuff.
Oh wow, God, you're really rolling the dice on that one.
Well, I can't remember the name of the rosé that my son's patterning after, but I think it might be the Lopez de Heredia, which they don't even start selling until it's either 8 or 10 years old. I mean, it's some crazy.
And hopefully you're not going to try that.
And I think we're not going to try that price point either.
That's good.
That's my job, to keep the price point in the world of realism. Anyway, it's great having him aboard. So we really are a thriving business, and I think at our peak and in that, at this point in our trajectory, most of our estate vineyards are over the age of 20, and that's just the mother lode. That's the golden zone for well-raised, sustainably farmed vineyards, where you really get depth of flavor, layers of subtlety that appear after the age of 15, which I thought by the time the vines were 10, you kind of pretty much saw everything that had to be offered. But we're seeing changes in vineyards when they hit the age of 17 and 18, which is really cool. So I think we're really on our game. We've got wonderfully mature relationships with a lot of our distributor partners, like Glunz, we've been with for decades.
Not too long. Yeah, I mean,
I think what's one of the things that this pandemic has really brought to my attention, and everyone has said this for years, is that the wine business is a relationship business, and I've spent most of my time developing those relationships and working the 3-tier system. And now that I've not been able to travel except for one market visit last month, those relationships really became apparent because they're all long distance and they're all functioning, or most of them are. And it's just really kind of heartwarming to see that all this work that we've put into this, distribution plan has borne fruit with the making of great friends and people we can really count on during extraordinarily challenging times. So,
well, we definitely look at the same side with our business, and we definitely, cherish and are anchored in relationship and the length of time that we've done business with not only our suppliers, wineries, but also with our customers.
Yeah, that's what it takes to do it. And I mean, you're on your side of the business, the same thing's been happening for years with consolidation and family companies like yours. When there's a generation change, maybe the next generation doesn't want to do it, and then they get bought up by the Southerns or the Nationals or whoever, and we have fewer choices to work with companies that we want to work with. So,
absolutely, my daughter's in the other room doing her education from a distance.
Right.
So even when she's doing that. She's right here at the office. So hopefully that sticks out for the G5s.
Yeah. So let's get to the Chardonnay. And at any time anybody has a question, please go ahead and post it. I don't want to be lecturing for an hour or whatever, but anytime you got a question, please go ahead and feel free to ask it. But let's start with the Chardonnay.
So it's hard to see with the beautiful background, but we've got the Keenan Chardonnay that we're going to go ahead and get started with. And I also wanted to let you know, Michael, you might not be able to see on that side, but we do have Matt, who is online at the winery. Hello, Matt. How are you, sir? I think you might be on mute. There you are.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a while, sir.
I know. You're looking good sitting out there on the picnic grounds.
Just right around the corner from me, right?
Right around the corner, yeah.
A little early for lunch.
You know, out here in Chicago, I mean, in the Chicago time zone, you know, we always eat earlier.
That's right, yeah. Cool, well, good to see you.
Great to see you as well. So we were just getting started here on the Chardonnay. And break open. Michael, are you tasting with us today?
No, I'm having coffee right now.
Sorry to hear that, my friend.
I'm not. I'm pretty familiar with these wines. So, but again, the underlying foundation for all these wines is elevation. The Chardonnay vineyard is actually probably one of the lower elevated vineyards. It's 1,700 feet, and most of the reds are growing between 1750 and 1975. So it's a marked difference from the valley floor. And I think just in general, and you certainly see it in the Chardonnay, one of the impacts of that setting is I think there's just more life force and more energy in the wines. And with the style of Chardonnay we make, which I call the original Napa style, because back in the 60s and 70s when we started, everybody made Chardonnay the same way. It was malolactic fermentation was not permitted. It was almost all barrel fermented, but in mostly neutral wood, because this style of making the Chardonnay more closely resembled white Burgundy, which was the template for everybody. And in the 80s is when the quote unquote Napa style took hold, you know, the full malolactic, the more oak, retention of sugar. And a lot of people think of that as being the Napa style, but this style is the original Napa style. And from that, you get more of a sense of purity and an expression of the subtle dynamic flavors that make Chardonnay. And I think
as far as saying balanced?
Yeah, it never falls out of the glass. It never gets dizzy. It's very well balanced. And really, the finish on this one, I think, just literally goes on and on and on, because there's no diacetyl to stop it and lay that sort of palate coating slick over your palate. This just has that sense of brightness and life that really just keeps going and going and going. And again, I think the style is more food friendly and age worthy. Not that anybody cares about aging white wines, but you can, should you choose to.
So what percent are you doing of malolactic? 0?
0.
And how long have you done 0 malolactic on the Chardonnays?
Our entire history.
Is that right?
We've done experiments.
Okay.
But every Chardonnay we put in the market has been 100% non-malolactic.
That is awesome. And it completely makes a difference in my opinion. I happen to have been under the young tutelage of my mentorship with Mike Gergich. And of course, he always said, you know, in California, we have no need to lower those acidities like they do in Burgundy and like they do in Chablis on years where they're picking, you know, fruit that's a heck of a lot. They don't have the luxury of getting the maturity in that fruit. When
we pick, the malic is just right. And of course, in Burgundy, it's undrinkable if it doesn't go through malic acid or malic fermentation. But this year we picked the Chardonnay between 22.4 and 22.8. And the acids were perfect. You know, TA right around 0.6 and 3.45, 3.5 on the pH. It's ideal.
Well, of course, you and I are preaching to the choir here between the two of us. Let's hope that that's what everybody else thinks. But I think it's just rocking. I know that that one more audience member, Kristen Glunz, my wife, absolutely adores this wine.
Well, I know this is an anecdotal story, but I'll tell it anyway. I've obviously done a lot of consumer tastings over the years, and I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a reaction from somebody who's tried the Chardonnay and has said, "Oh my God, this is delicious," and I don't even like Chardonnay. And I always can assume that they don't like Chardonnay because they've had that, quote unquote Napa style, and didn't like it and thought that's what all Chardonnay was like. But
Right.
It's still, unfortunately, the dominant style from Napa is the heavier style, but I think it's beginning to trend back towards this.
No question. I mean, the extreme that a lot of people have been going to for a while with the naked Chardonnay, the unoaked Chardonnays, I don't think that's the answer either. I think it has its place in certain areas, but definitely not where the correct response is, and that is to just aim for, again, in my opinion, and obviously yours, aim for that balance in the harvest, balance in the vintage, balance in the acidity, the sugar, and as well as the oak.
Yeah, the barrel fermentation is critical because that size vessel is perfect to get the sur-lie contact, which we stir up, and that gives you the appropriate creaminess and richness. Because Chardonnay, by nature, has a nice richness to it. But when you can combine liveliness, purity of flavor, length of finish, and richness, well, then what do you have? You have Chardonnay.
Right.
You have really good Chardonnay.
We do have a question, Mike, I'm going to throw into you. The question is, did you face pressure to appease the market demand in the 80s and 90s when others departed from this traditional style and America started drinking the more mallow-driven styles? And then did you just have a loyal customer base that you thought of at that time?
Well, the answer to part A of that question is no. And I can't remember what my father said about this years ago, but it's certainly been a core tenet of my operating MO is that you can't follow trends in the wine business. You've got to do what you think you should do for the terroir that you live in and make your idea of what you think is great. And I've always thought if we execute on those parameters, we will never be the darling or the new hot winemaker or whatever, but we will always have customers. We will always resonate with enough people to make our market. We're not making 100,000 or 1 million cases of wine. We don't have to worry about mass market appeal. We just have to worry about getting out our message enough to people who really appreciate what we think is distinct wines from an outstanding appellation, which is Spring Mountain.
God, what a great answer. Well done, sir.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So do you want Michael to switch to Matt in the cellar there?
Sure. Matt, you want to go downstairs? And looks like he's doing that already.
Oh, yeah. He's downstairs, baby.
Yeah, I'm there. So, yeah, we're pressing off a tank today. This is Cabernet Sauvignon off the estate that we're draining out of the tank. You can see we got lots of berries coming out too. But look at that great color. I hope this is coming through okay.
It is. It's great.
Yeah.
Can you turn your phone horizontal? Oh, that's perfect.
Yep. Yeah, so wish you were here to smell it. The aromas are pretty killer.
We're good with technology, but we haven't figured that part out yet, Matt.
We're not getting there yet. I know. Art's here taking care of it. So we're pulling off all the free-run juice right now and wine basically, and we'll be breaking out the solids soon. Anyway, that's what the project is this morning. Let me know if I start breaking up because we're walking away from the router now, but wanted to show. Go ahead, Michael.
There's the fig tree. Matt, can you go over what we're doing a little bit differently this year as far as pressing off a little bit earlier and keeping press lots and free run different?
Yeah. So because the smoke impact can get kind of bound up in grape skins. We are doing less skin contact, so we're pressing wines off a little earlier than usual. We're also not pressing as hard, so just going up to 1 bar instead of close to 2. And then as we start what's that? As we start pressing, we're keeping the press slots separate. So they're going into a separate tank or into separate barrel because there's a better chance that if there is some sort of smoke impact, that it's going to get worse as we press and squeeze harder on the skins and seeds. So that's it mostly. We're also just sampling lots. So we're pulling berry samples from the vineyard before we pick and sending them to the lab to get analysis on that. And then we're pulling the sample from the wine once it's dry before it goes to barrel. And then we'll get those results like sometime around Christmas. Because the labs are so backed up at this point, they just have never had to deal with this much, with so many wineries submitting samples. So literally, samples that we're pulling now, we probably won't see until potentially December results on. We haven't received we haven't received any results back on anything I've pulled so far. So we'll see how it goes.
All right, so we're looking at your press right now that is not being used. You have what percentage of your crop in, harvest done?
Probably 95% from the estate, maybe more. We only have 3 blocks left on the estate. Just a little Cabernet Sauvignon, or actually a nice sized lot of Cabernet Sauvignon, some Cabernet Franc, and a tiny lot of Zinfandel. And then we have some Carneros Merlot that's not in yet, but we're definitely getting there. So, but yeah, that's the press, which we will be using soon. We're filling it with the Cabernet that I showed you earlier. Down here, we have another bay of tanks. David's
Yeah, he's far enough from the Wi-Fi. I think he just cut out.
It's amazing how that wall just it literally just
My
5
back?
steps out of it.
Yeah, he's back now.
Did it come
But
back?
I think we probably are using every one of the tanks more
Anyway,
this
yeah.
than ever, with having free run lots, press lots, and thank God we have that tank farm outside too.
Definitely gives you a lot more opportunities.
No, it's nice. It's nice to have all the room that we do this year for keeping things separate. So
I think normally at this stage of harvest, when we're very close to the end, there's usually a palpable sense of relief, or like we're pretty much done, and now we can start planning our special lunch we always have to celebrate the end of picking. But this year there's just a heightened level of anxiety because there's just so much uncertainty as to how this is all going to come out. Because from what we learned about smoke taint is you can't always sense it. So we've tasted every berry that we picked, the fruit. We've tasted everything, during fermentation, after fermentation, but we cannot be really certain until we get these test results back. And even then, when we get the test results back, this technology is relatively new, and there still will be some level of uncertainty. We might be pretty sure, and we could be tasting the wines right before we bottle them. They could be all great, but then we have to worry about some smoke taint particles can get bound up and not get released for years in the bottle. So it's just it's a whole different feeling, and I definitely, I think we all are a little bit more anxious this year at this stage, as opposed to feeling, you know, a sense of relief and triumph as we approach the end of this crazy period. And this year has been crazier than ever, because almost every year before harvest starts, we have that feeling of, oh my God, everything's going to ripen at once. And it's this, you know, kind of anxiety kind of dream you have during the day and at night. And this year, everything almost did ripen at once, and we are going to have the most compressed harvest I think we've ever had. When we started on the 2nd, and we are going to finish whatever, I think we're going to pick on Monday and finish those last blocks. So whatever Monday is.
Yeah.
I've lost
Monday and
track.
Tuesday.
Yeah, Monday's the 28th, so that's going to be 26 days to pick the entire state, which I don't think we've ever done it that fast before.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So usually it's 4 to 5 weeks elapsed time from beginning of harvest to end. I mean, everything about this year, aside from the fabulous 6.5 months of the COVID festival, as I like to call it, it's just been a really unique growing year. We had the latest bud break we've ever seen, which surprised us because we had such a warm February with no rain at all. So we thought we'd see bud break at the end of February, maybe even a record early bud break. But it's like the vines knew that what March was going to be, which was kind of rainy, dark, and cold. So they didn't come out, and started to pop out around, I think, April 10th, which I think is our latest start to the season ever. So then you start thinking about, okay, September, we're going to probably start picking maybe second, third week of September, and we'll finish in October. And then you start worrying about, well, what if October's cold? You know, we won't get stuff right, blah, blah, blah. And then we hit this weather pattern beginning in the middle of May that was just so consistently beautiful, day after day. No clouds in the sky, perfect temperatures. And by the second week of August, when Varation was cruising along, we thought, God, we're almost caught up to normal. And then we had this 10-day heat wave near the end of August with those lightning storms. Of course, the fire started, which was crazy again. And then we had a record heat wave on Labor Day. We for the first time in our history, recorded temperatures over 100 degrees on Labor Day. We hit 105 for the first time in our history.
Yeah, that was just crazy.
Yeah, 3 years ago, for 2017, I thought that was a pretty bad heat wave. We hit 100 for one day. And I think the valley got up to 115. So it also just shows you the difference between the temperature protection we have on the high end up on the mountain as opposed to the valley.
Absolutely.
Just fantastic that we can really preserve the acidities.
It really shows you the difference. I mean, that's mountain fruit, baby.
Yeah, the combination of phenolic ripeness with higher acidities and great tannin levels make for, I think, truly great wines. So should we move on to the next wine?
Absolutely.
Now, if I just want to underscore one more thing, I think I've talked about generally where we are as a business, you know, how mature we are, the vineyards and everything, but
mature business-wise.
Dave right there. Yeah, but also as a team, we've been just incredibly steady. I mean, Matt, my general manager, who you just saw, has been with us since 1995. You saw Art briefly. Art's officially our cellar master. It took him 10 years as the assistant cellar master to shed the tag new guy. And now I think he's in his 18th year working for us. Upstairs in the tasting room, if you ever come to visit, I'm sure you'll meet Laura. Laura's been with us since 1996. And I think Dave is the cellar assistant. Now he's the new guy. He's been with us for about a year and a half. And Elizabeth upstairs for about 2 years. So we just had this incredible continuity on the winemaking and vineyard management side, which has been, you just can't put a figure on how valuable that is. And
then you got Riley, the new guy.
Yeah. And also Matt and his family live on the property. Art and his family live on the property. Laura lived on the property for 25 years. Now she's moved next door and lives on our neighbor's property. My son lives on the property. It's a pretty outstanding situation.
Riley lives up on that campground. Is that where you put him?
Well, for those of you who've been to the winery before, we used to have a guest house called the Love Shack. And we tore it down over a year ago and rebuilt it. That's now Riley's house.
Oh, nice.
So if you get to know Riley, you can stay in the Love Shack.
All right, next wine, Michael, Merlot. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't see it with that beautiful background.
So I mean, just to make this real short, Spring Mountain's Merlot Heaven. I think it's one of the top Merlot appellations, not just in Napa or on the West Coast, but I think in the world. Again, the combination of elevation, the amount of degree days of sun we get, the lower temperatures, and then in the soil, that somewhat rare combination of clay and incredible drainage from all the rockiness makes for Merlot Heaven. And it's our number one bottling by number. Cabernet, of course, is number one, but it's a pretty close 1 and 2 split. But Merlot is actually my favorite varietal. And I think now we are making 4 different Merlot, 100% Merlot bottlings a year. The Napa Merlot, which you're drinking, which is our number one Merlot ski, we make about 2,500 to 3,000 cases of that. And that's usually about a 75 estate, 25 Carneros blend. But since I think 2008, it's been 100% Merlot. We used to put a little Cabernet Franc in it in some years. But the Merlot vineyards are so mature now and so expressive that it hasn't needed the Cabernet Franc to really help lift the nose or add any kind of textural or structural elements to it. So it's just a really solid Merlot that has, not only depth of fruit, but, great acidity. It's got tannin, it's got minerality. It's got just a hint of spiciness to it, and just a super food wine.
Did your dad start doing Merlot there as a focus, or did that just kind of come about as a higher demand item?
It was not his focus. His focus was on Cabernet. That was, he wanted to be a left bank first growth producer, and then grow a little bit of Chardonnay for cash flow, as everybody did back in the 70s, and planted Merlot and Cabernet Franc as blending tools. And then we discovered, after 5 or 6 years or 10 years that the Merlot on its own was really, really good. So we then planted more of it and began to focus on it. And I think we started making it actually in 78 in small amounts, and have been adding to the Merlot profile sort of steadily since then. And like I say, now I make 4 100% Merlot bottlings. 3 of them are single vineyard. Then I make two of my best wines are blends, and they're both Merlot driven. A wine called Marinade and a wine called Side by Side.
That is beautiful. If anybody wants to unmute at this point to ask any questions to Matt or to Michael, and there are a couple questions in the chat side. One is asking if you feel that the smoke is now considered a part of the terroir, or do you try to mitigate the smoke and treat it as a flaw?
That's an easy question. No is the answer to that question. We do not consider smoke part of terroir. That was an enormous mistake that a lot of producers from Mendocino made in 2008 who were producing Pinot Noir that had smoke taint from the '08 fires. And it sort of became, I think, a joke in the industry that they were trying to pass this off as terroir. And the consumers would taste these wines and go, what the hell are these people thinking, as I did. So if we have smoke taint, we will not produce that wine.
Great. And the next question was, how long do you leave the Cabernet Sauvignon macerating on a typical year on the skins before draining and pressing?
Well, usually it's 2 days before fermentation starts that we'll do what we call a cold soak. We do not do any extended macerations after fermentation's done. We stopped doing that back in, 1999, 1998. That's what we used to do. Was we would finish primary fermentation, then do an extended 2-week maceration, which was pretty common, and for a lot of people it still is. But for mountain fruit, we just found that you would lose the freshness and you would increase the tannin fuzz or, sort of rascally texture. So we've been pressing off, between, 1, 2, and 5 bricks for a long time. And then finishing fermentation in either another tank or in barrel. And this year we're pressing off even earlier, up to 8 degrees bricks, because of just a little concern about smoke taint, trying to minimize skin contact. And we find that we get color so easily and so quickly from this mountain fruit that it's not a concern about concentration or color or structure. We're really working on freshness and texture is what we need to add to the equation as winemakers. And what the terroir gives us is great concentration, structure, depth, all that kind of stuff, power.
Michael, is there a connection between the acidity level, either higher or lower, to the extraction of the colors from the skin?
That's a question I really can't answer. I don't know, Matt, did you hear that?
We haven't really noticed that. We do notice actually temperature is more influential. So if we have a lot that gets picked of red wine that comes in later in the day compared to a lot that came in earlier in the day in cooler temperatures, we'll get faster extraction, but not necessarily more extraction. It's going to extract fully by the time we're ready to press. But we will get faster extraction with lots that are warm.
Okay. And then I'm guessing also with the higher alcohol levels, you're going to be pulling a lot more color, but also a lot more astringencies at that point as well.
Yeah. As alcohol is produced through the fermentation, it'll act as a solvent, and you'll start extracting faster and faster as the alcohol increases.
Gotcha. Cool. Fantastic. Should we go ahead and move on to the estate cab, the Napa Valley Cabernet?
Sure.
Can't see that with my beautiful background, but.
So this is our number 1 SKU by volume. We make between 3,000 and 4,000 cases of this wine. And again, it's an estate-based wine with usually a pretty healthy dose, about 25% Cabernet Sauvignon from the Pope Valley. And that's one of the things that's going to be markedly different about 2020 is that the LNU complex fires burned right up to the edge of the Pope Valley vineyard that we buy from. And we had to reject that crop this year.
Oh, wow.
So, that SKU will be different somehow. We've batted around ideas from using more Merlot to using some 2019 Pope Valley fruit, which is in barrel right now, and then maybe even doing a non-vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. Because to put vintage on a label, it's got to be 95%. So if we got down to 93% or 92% of 2020 fruit, that would technically be a non-vintage wine, which we've never done, but it might not be a bad idea, especially if somehow the public remembers what happens this year, which is a stretch. And when the 2020 vintage hits the market, there's this actual memory of, oh no, that's smoke taint. We don't want that wine. If it says non-vintage, then we would avoid that. But we've just been batting these ideas around. We really don't know what we're going to do until we're certain of how clean all the fruit is. And so that's, as Matt said, we're not going to get results back until maybe even as late as Christmas. So that's, like I said, there's so much uncertainty in this vintage. But Cabernet you're enjoying 2016 is a great vintage.
Mm-hmm.
That I've said from the beginning, this wine has just everything I want to see in Cabernet. And again, I try to make this as simple as possible. I want to see in Cabernet a range of flavor, because that's what makes Cabernet the king of the Bordeaux family. Is it has the biggest sort of flavor fan. It's the most complex and the most types of flavor. And so you have the scope of, you have sweet fruit flavors and you have savory, herbaceous, and vegetal flavors. And I want to have all of those flavors in the game, in the party. There should be a dominant part of the Cabernet that is the sweet pole, or what I call the North Pole. But the Southern Hemisphere, the subdominant pole, you should have hints of all those other 3 elements: savory, herbaceous, and vegetal. And if you have that, that means you picked at the right time. So I kind of cringed when Joe was saying, high alcohol, because that's something I think we take pride in, is that our wines are well below the Napa average for alcohol. I think this says 14.3 on the bottle, which is really close to actually what it is. So that's why we're picking before a lot of guys pick. We're picking, I mean, we try to pick before 25 degrees Brix, which is almost unheard of in Napa. And sometimes we pick at 24. Some of the 2015s we picked at 23, and we even picked a block in 2015 in the 22s, because we had the phenolic maturity. And even though the numbers weren't quite normal, we trusted our senses, Matt and I, and said, no, I think we're ready to go. And I think that's why 2015s are so beautiful and will live so long and have such great subtlety and purity of fruit. This year's been a little tougher because it's been so fast. So we did pick, I got my chart right in front of me here, so I can tell you. Some of these blocks have come in over 25, and we have done a little post-harvest rehydration to knock that down a little bit. So they'll end up being probably 14.3 to 14.8 as a guess in the final scope of things. But again, it's really important for me to see that range of flavors. It's not just fruit-centric, it's omni-centric. It shows the range of flavors in Cabernet, and that's our goal every year. Every vintage has its own identity. And for me, 2016, when we finished blending the 2016s a little over 2 years ago, I was dumbfounded. Every single wine to me was A or A+. And I said, this is really in the running for one of the best vintages, all around vintages in our history. These wines literally have everything I want to see in a wine, except age right now. So, and we do make wines that are, I think, extraordinarily age worthy, but, and that's why we hold them back a little bit longer. 2016 is our current release on Cabernet, and will be for another 6 months, probably. April is usually the release of the Cabernets when they hit the age of 4. So it's part of our program.
So Michael, let me sneak back before we go to the next wine with what Matt is showing here. So is this a typical procedure with fruit that you do every year, or is this specific to this vintage?
Well, I'll let Matt take that.
Yeah, this is normal. Yeah, this is how we do it. We're trying to get as much of the free run out of the tank as we can, and so we're letting it go through the screen there and pulling out all the berries that are coming through. We'll get more and more berries coming through as the tank drains, and then all the free run juice goes into the bottom of the tank here, and then is getting pumped into this tank at the end of the bay here. So yeah, this is totally how we do. Nothing changes here in terms of unloading a tank for this season. This is just how it's done.
And how long has it been in the tank with the skins at this point?
About 7 days.
7 days?
Yeah, 7 days. So our fermentations this year, it's been pretty much everything has been right on the 7 or 8 day range, which is 2 to 3 days less than usual in terms of when we're pressing. So back to pressing early, we're pulling off the skins 2 to 3 days earlier than usual.
So then from here you have the 55-gallon drums of the berries and the skins, and that is all that will go through the press. Yeah,
so pretty simple, just manhandling the fruit. Now it's goes into the those are like 30-gallon buckets there, and we'll basically just load them onto a pallet. We'll lift the pallet up above the press there, put up the press gates and dump them in, and we'll do that again and again until we have the tank emptied of all the solids.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, should we go to the reserve, sir?
Sure.
We have the 2014 Keenan Reserve Cabernet.
This is, I'll tell you what's unique about this wine. Well, two things. Almost every vintage of Cabernet goes through an awkward phase at some point in its life, whether it's during fermentation, right after fermentation, a year in barrel, right before we bottle, right after we bottle, right in the middle of selling it, right when you finish selling it. This vintage has simply never had a bad day. It's really unique. It's been just luscious, delicious, explosive fruit from the moment we were fermenting it. Then the markers that I think are unique for 2014 are more of that sweet blackberry and almost sweet pencil lead quality, which are, to me, sort of the two of the unique markers that stand out a little bit more about 2014 for me. And it's, to me, just has an obvious sense of deliciousness that is quite pleasing. It is now 6 years old, and you can pass it off as a library wine. But could make a comment about library wines. Usually we wait until a wine's been off the market for 3 or 4 years before we actually put it into the library and make it accessible as a library wine. So if you go to our library list on our website, you'll see 2012 as the youngest vintage. So the 13s, 14s, and 15s, which are not in the market, are in that sort of that purgatory period between being a current release and then being in the library.
So the blending of your reserve versus your the estate Napa different blends, are you looking at specific lots, looking at the specific clones that are always going into the reserve, and just kind of directing those to that program? Or is it something that you look at all of your available assets and kind of assess that different lineup every year?
More of the former, but a little bit of the latter. I mean, every year when we start the Cabernet blends, we'll taste every lot separately that we have, including the Pope Valley lot. But we've come to know when we do a blind, we have come to know that there's what we call the A team and the B team, and the reserve cab always comes from the B team, and those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Cabernet blocks that rotate depending on what year it is, the bulk of the material for the reserve cab. And that's a question of, is there going to be any Cab Franc in it? Is there going to be any Merlot in it? And that varies from year to year. And I can't remember. It says it probably on the back of the label. I don't have the bottle with me.
We have 3% Cab Franc in this. Otherwise,
Yeah.
78 clone 15, 19 clone 7.
Yeah, it's more often than not, it's a blend of the bulk of the Cabernet part is either dominant 15, subdominant 7, or dominant 7, subdominant 15. Usually, 337 plays a role in some years, and then the point vineyard, which I think is clone 412, plays a role in a couple of years. And like I said, sometimes 100% Cab, sometimes Cab Franc, sometimes Merlot. I was never in the camp of, let's make 100% Cabernet, because I was raised on French wines and I was taught that you blend Cabernet. Cabernet is not a standalone varietal, like Chardonnay or Pinot Noir or Merlot. So we always blended it. And I think it wasn't until 2003, which was the first year that the estate reserve Cabernet was actually 100% estate Cabernet Sauvignon. I remember being shocked when we got to the point in the blending trials where I thought, well, this wine's complete. It's it. And it's 2 blocks of Cabernet Sauvignon. I was stunned. But there you go. So there's no rule other than we kind of know there's 5 blocks, really 3 blocks that are usually going to produce the anchor part of the wine.
How many different Cabernet clones?
Them all together.
How many different Cabernet clones do you guys have on the property?
7, 15, 4, 337, and 412. So I guess that's 5.
And 337 used to be the darling back in the day, correct?
It's a great clone. I really like it. but I can't really speak to its popularity with other people.
I just remember it was, I want to say in the early 2000s, late 90s, everyone was talking about 337 and everybody was planning. It was like Davis was just coming out with these trials and tastings, and it seemed like everybody was jumping all over it. But, you know, that was the first time that we really ever kind of broke out of the nursery segment of the conversation about clonal development and clonal varietal differences, you know, to the consumer, or even to an educated customer base, or I'm sorry, you know, sommeliers and wine buyers just never would ever ask that. And then it was more and more talked about. So maybe it was a combination of both, but.
Yeah, I mean, I almost never talk about clonal selection when I'm selling the wine to consumers, or even selling the wine to wine buyers. I just don't think people are that interested. They just really want to, especially professional wine buyers, they just want to taste the wine and get a general picture of, you know, where's it from, how's it made. Occasionally people want to talk about clones, but not that often. So then just to get to the point of the difference between the Reserve and the Napa blend is it's the evolution of the program. Having to replant all of our estate Cabernet, all of our estate Cabernet Franc, and most of our Merlot and Chardonnay between 1995 and 98, we had to go out and buy fruit from, I think at one point, every appellation in Napa, which was a wonderful learning experience. And then when our estate Cabernets and everything else came back online, we kept one Cabernet contract, and that was from the Pope Valley. And since that year, which I think was 2001, we've made an estate Cabernet and then what we call a Napa Cabernet. So the Napa Cabernet is essentially all the estate fruit that doesn't get picked for the Reserve gets blended together, and then we add the Pope Valley Cabernet to it, and occasionally add Merlot or Cab Franc, or now we have Petit Bordeaux as an option to play with in that blend as well.
And
so maybe. I don't picture that myself. I've also never understood Syrah and Cabernet together, which I know a lot of people do, but it just doesn't work in my mind.
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Maybe we can, before we jump into Zin, just ask Matt if you can do a little bit of a vineyard discussion and talk a little bit about the estate and what you've got going there.
Sure. I'm about ready to lose my battery, but I also wanted to show you guys, they're about ready to dump some of the pumice into the press, and I'll show you that. But yeah, we're looking here at the Chardonnay out in front of us, and off to the left of that, over in here, is where the Mourvedre block is that you guys have been talking about. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. Here's the fig tree.
It's an integral part of our life this time of year.
So you guys were talking about clonal selection earlier, and I think with the clones, they're also site specific where they're planted. It's so much more. I think there's so much more impact from where the grapes are planted compared to the clone. We have clone 7 planted in 2 different spots on this property, and it ripens at different times and makes a different wine. It's both Cabernet Sauvignon, but planted in different exposures in different places, and it's the same clone. So really, in terms of clonal selection, I think we're seeing more impact from where the grapes are planted than, you know, the genetics behind what that variety is. So.
Well, and in lieu of what Matt's saying is the difference we have in temperature and microclimate on the property is extraordinary. I mean, you were just looking at the Chardonnay vineyard, and off to the right is sort of the south east corner, and that backs up to this little canyon that draws in the coolest air on the property. So it's great to have the Chardonnay growing in the coolest microsite. Then if you leave the driveway and you go up that hill and make a right through that little gap and get up on the main driveway, go halfway down to where Matt's house is, into the Point Vineyard where our main Zinfandel block is, that can be 15 degrees warmer and sort of southeast exposure, and is just the warmest site. It's perfect for Zin, and we also grow Alcante and Carignan there. It's just amazing. The Chardonnay vineyard, we haven't had to water for 20 years. And the Point Vineyard, where the Zin grows, we also have a block of Cabernet there grows. It doesn't matter how much rainfall we get. In 2017, we got over 80 inches of rain, and we still had to water that vineyard extensively or regularly. So it's amazing study in microclimates and slight difference in terroir exposure and temperature on a relatively small piece of property. You know, it's extraordinary. So let's get to the Zin before we run out of time here, because I know that the clock is ticking here. The Zin is one of my favorite wines to show now, because I think it's such a unique standout for the varietal. I really think this is what was made on our property over 100 years ago by the Conradis who built our winery in 1904. This is a field blend of primarily Zinfandel with some Alcante, Boucher, and Carignan that we grow. We co-pick them, co-ferment them, and make them in what I call a table style or a claret style. So it's the same alcohol as my entire portfolio. It's 14.3, and this wine has nuance to it. It has what I call that double herbaceous panel, as well as the marker, the sweet Zin fruit in the nose. The wine's dry, but it has that double herbaceous panel. It has the cooling mentholated herbs that you get in some of our wines off the property, but it also has this almost medicinal herbal amaro-like note to it, which is really cool. And those are subdominant flavors, but they add complexity to the wine. And again, since it's picked at the right time, it's got acidity, it's got brightness to it, it's got length of finish. It's not bludgeoned with Petit Syrah, which is so common with Zin to give it color and body and structure. But to me, Zin it's more like Pinot Noir. You know, it's more of a nuanced, light to medium bodied, light to medium colored wine. Then when made right, it's charming as hell. And again, we can age this wine for over 20 years, and it pairs with an amazing array of foods.
Yeah, the aromatics on this are Michael, the Zinfandel, are just spectacular.
Cool.
And it's almost Syrah-esque in some of its profile. I mean, it definitely doesn't say scream Syrah, and there's zero. It's 100% Zin, I believe, on this. The tech sheet we have says 85% Spring Mountain, and then 15% Zin. Now that's a great shot, by the way.
It's actually, it's not 100% Zin. It's got Carignan and Alcante in it.
Okay. Can't always trust these tech sheets, I tell you.
We keep some things a secret.
Magic sauce, man. You just can't give it all up.
Yeah.
Boy, does that bring me back to days of Crush.
I bet, yeah. And I think I have to bail out here. I'm about ready to lose my battery, but that's the Clone 7 pumice going in out of the tank and into the press.
That's awesome. Matt, thanks so much for that.
No problem. Good to see you guys, and hang in there.
Yeah, you too, my friend. You too.
Okay. All right. Take care.
So one of the questions that was shot to us via chat is, what does Alcante Boucher add to the wine?
Well, it adds a true red color, for one thing. It's shocking to see it for the first time when you put it in the December. We did it separately the first couple years before we started co-picking, but you know, it's one of the two true red grapes that I know of.
And
so
by true red, you mean, you know, you cut a grape in half, typically Cabernet Sauvignon, Zinfandel, cut it in Merlot, you cut it in half, the inside's green. With Alcante, you cut it in half and it's red.
It's bright red, yeah. So it gives you color and a little bit of spice. And then Carignan also, I think, adds a little bit of spice to it as well. I mean, that Amaro-like note probably comes from the Carignan. So they add a little bit of complexity. little bit of color, because Zin doesn't have, great color on its own, which is why Petit Syrah is so often used to give Zinfandel color. But I think Petit Syrah is a rather clumsy varietal, and it's just it's so the opposite of Zinfandel, and I think it tends to take away the nuance from Zin, whereas these two varietals add to Zin without overwhelming it. So their additions are subtle, but noteworthy and worth putting in.
And mountain grown Zin, you don't find a lot of that in Napa for sure.
No, well, you can say the same thing about Chardonnay. The mountain Chardonnay is extraordinarily rare in today's Napa, and for the same reason, people can make so much more money growing Cabernet. I mean, if we tore out everything but Cabernet and planted it back to Cabernet, we'd be making more money. But to me, that's not really the entire goal. For one thing, I love Merlot too much not to grow and make Merlot, but
absolutely,
I love all these wines. And
we share that passion,
I think,
for sure.
And again, because we have diversity of microclimates, we have appropriate places to grow different varietals, which I think is terrific. We're not just one big 80-acre vineyard on the plains of Oakville, where you would put mostly, if not all, Cabernet. We're up in the mountains with 4 distinct vineyard zones, and then different blocks in all those vineyard zones. So a lot of diversity, which I think is really good.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap up a little bit. I'm going to invite anyone to unmute and go ahead and ask any questions. You can throw any more questions in the chat. But in wrapping up, Michael, anything further that you wanted to add in closing?
No, I think we covered a lot. So if everybody retains 10% of that, I'll be thrilled.
Well, I think Alicia Barrett's got all of this recorded in her head, so she'll be regurgitating this to her whole team for sure.
I do. I love your wines. Sorry, I'm going to unmute for a second and just quickly ask my question. In a few words, can you describe kind of Spring Mountain wines and kind of the style that comes with it? Obviously, it's producer dependent, but generally, can you differentiate Spring Mountain to the other mountain AVAs?
Yeah, I think that to me, there's a couple of things we see in Spring Mountain wines that are either unique or close to unique. And in a word, it's freshness is one thing. And again, it's that Eastern exposure, I think, allows you to make wines that have more of a sense of freshness. And part of that is we do get some sort of mentholated herbaceous qualities in a lot of our wines. And those to me have a really fresh quality to them. Also because of the rainfall we get, and if you grow and you make the wines properly, you really get a rich, satisfying tannin that's refreshing as opposed to drying. And then I think you can in some wines you can get sort of that damp, rich, loamy earth quality too, which is a reflection of the terroir and the rainfall we get. So I think those are the markers I see that are sort of unique or semi-unique to Spring Mountain.